Forty20 Newscast.
Good afternoon, it's Tom Alderson here. I'm with Tom Coates. We are the co-founders of Forty20 News, and we're here again with Forty20 News reporter Callum Walker to bring you another Forty20 Newscast. It's Friday the 14th of August to discuss all the major talking points and stories coming out of the world of Rugby League in the last week. We start with a fairly big one to come out of Super League land, the COVID-19 outbreak at Hull FC. Earlier in the week, we got the news that 6 players, 5 of which played against Salford Red Devils the previous Sunday, and 2 members of staff have unfortunately tested positive for COVID-19. This has meant that Hull's clash with Castleford Tigers was immediately postponed. The Salford players have all had to have immediate testing, which have all, fortunately, from what we've heard so far, come back negative. But it does mean that their fixture against Catalan has also been cancelled, which has forced a bit of a rejig for this week's fixtures. Tom, come to you first on this. This is pretty big news and an awful disruption for the Super League, pretty much straight off the bat, the first full round of fixtures. What were your thoughts when you heard the news? And do you think this highlights possibly a need for tighter restrictions on the Super League players, as we've seen in other competitions and possibly the NRL?
It was an awful disruption, and I think the timing of it made it seem even more dramatic in the sense that it was released so late at night. It was about 10 to 11 on Tuesday night when the news emerged. Obviously, the media department at Super League and the RFL moving very quickly to get this information out. But, whilst it is, hugely disappointing and hugely disruptive, it is really just reflective of the wider picture in that it was never going to be a case of a straight road to recovery in terms of coronavirus. And obviously we've been, ticking off these milestones with, the fixtures being announced, the date for the return being announced, the first matches being played. And we've just sort of got our eyes on the horizon thinking, well, the next milestone is we get the crowds back in, and the next milestone is we play the Challenge Cup final, and then we're suddenly back to normal. But I think the news that broke on Tuesday night is a reminder that road isn't going to be so straight, and there are going to be setbacks, and we are going to have to adapt, and we are going to have to make decisions that aren't ideal, such as changing a team's fixture list at short notice, which I have to say I think the clubs and coaches have reacted very professionally to that, and that's a credit to them. Is it a sort of reminder or a warning that we should be doing things differently? I don't think it is, because I don't really see what we could, in practice, do differently. I think as a sport, we don't have the resources and the money that, say, for example, elite football has, in the sense that we can't put players in bubbles and expect them to sort of live in a controlled environment all week and pay for the facilities for them to do that. So I think an inevitability of the way we're doing things is that there are going to be setbacks and we have to recover from them. And I think the solution that's been put in place for this weekend is far from ideal. There's going to be a lot of things that are far from ideal, but I think it's the best thing we could have done, and we've just got to crack on and redouble our efforts in terms of being precautionary, and let's get some more games played, and let's get to the end of the season.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you make there about the situation not being as clear cut and the same as sort of Premier League football or the NRL clubs being in bubbles, etc. That might not be a realistic thing for the Super League competition. Callum, Tom's already sort of touched on this a little bit, that there was an air of inevitability about this sort of being a stumble in the road for Super League. Do you think that this could potentially be an isolated incident with just the Hull FC players, or have you got genuine concern that this could rear its head again and possibly threaten the future of the whole competition?
I think there's a danger that could definitely happen, because you've seen the fact that 6 Hull FC players have already got it. I mean, it's only been 2 weeks into the start of the season and restart of the season, and that just proves that people can't be complacent. I was in the press conference with Christian Wolf this week, and he said basically it keeps you on your toes. It makes you be even more aware of the dangers and the precautions that you need to take. But I mean, if you live outside of the bubbles in the NRL, you've got family who are working, you've got children who go to school, and there's obviously going to be some inevitable kind of mix there that could put players in danger. And like Tom said, I think it is probably inevitable that there will be some more kind of happenings down the line.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with both of you. I think that the fact that we're not in a like-for-like situation with some of these sports and competitions that have possibly got the luxury of, not the luxury, but have got the facilities, like you say, to have tighter restrictions means that we are more susceptible to stuff like this happening. The players aren't in these COVID bubbles that they are allowed, and their families can go and mix, within the rules in the UK, and that opens itself up obviously to more risk. So, we'll see what happens. Hopefully, this instance will be one of and few and far between, but we'll wait and see what happens. I think it's just worth noting as well there that there's been a lot of negativity towards Hull FC and the Hull FC players, a lot of criticism that they may not be adhering to social distancing rules, etc. But I think the main thing to focus on as well is that it is a virus, it is an illness, so which is having devastating effects worldwide, and we give our best wishes to the Hull FC players and the staff, and wish them well in their recovery from the virus. Moving on though, we've had some more. It's been a busy week again in player movement. With some of the most notable ones, Gareth O'Brien, the Toronto fullback, been confirmed this week as a Castleford Tigers player, effective immediately. Callum, your initial thoughts on this signing? This is obviously a position that Castleford have been looking to fill. What do you think he can add to the Tigers?
Well, I think if you saw Castleford in action against Catalan at the weekend, I think my initial thought was the need of fullback, pure and simple because Darryl Powell's he's experimented over the years with Greg Eden at fullback, and it hasn't worked. And Eden himself didn't play that badly, but it was just clear that there was some kind of positional play, that was missing, some kind of command at the back. You had your Luke Dawn, your Zach Hardacre, and Greg Eden for me just didn't fill that kind of role. So with Gareth O'Brien, experienced fullback, he's 28 now. He seems to have been around forever. And Darryl Powell, is an admirer of him. He tried to buy him, I think, before he went to Toronto. So it proves that that he has wanted him for some time, and I do think that it will bring quite a lot to the club. Defensive sternness and an attacking prowess as well. So yeah, I think Castleford fans should be quite happy with that signing.
Yeah, it certainly, from my point of view, brings an extra pair of hands. He's almost like another playmaker, Gareth O'Brien. You get a lot of fullbacks that have got very strong running games, very elusive, and that's perhaps not his forte, but what he is very good at is taking advantage of the 2-on-1s, the 3-on-2s, creating the extra man, and he's played a lot of halfback earlier in his career as well. So I think that could be the answer, like you say, to a lot of Castleford's problems. That's a nice segue into more fallout from Toronto. It just seems to be never ending, unfortunately. With Toronto enforcer Darcy Lussick this week almost putting a plea out on social media to the RFL to help the Toronto players and their families in their current situation, has confirmed, among other players, that there'd been no pay for any of the players and staff for 3 months now. Lussick himself is facing eviction from his house in the UK. He hasn't got a visa to work in the UK. He hasn't got a visa to go back to Australia. Tom, we just keep going down and down with more and more bad news coming out of Toronto. Do you think this fiasco's hit rock bottom with the latest developments?
Hopefully it isn't far from being rock bottom, because I don't know how much worse it can get. We've reached the point where we have players using Twitter as a platform to share their stories because they don't feel like their voices are being heard, and they don't feel like they're getting their support. They're getting the support from the RFL, or they're getting the support from Toronto. It's interesting that the way Darcy Lussick worded his tweet was to say that the players are contracted to an RFL competition, therefore it's the RFL's responsibility. And in last week's episode, I spoke about how our sympathies need to be with the Toronto players, and that throughout all of the story, and despite all of our perspectives on Toronto as a club and as an organisation, we need to think about the players. But the way that Lussick worded his tweet was quite interesting, because as much as the RFL do have a duty to support, as much as our Rugby League Cares has a duty to support and to reach out to players, it does ultimately fall on Toronto as a club to fulfil the contracts. The contracts that the players signed are with Toronto Wolfpack, that they are with the organisation. It's a horrible situation. I feel confident that the RFL are doing what they can do, and I know that their press release their advisory to journalists, which we ran on 4020 News, courtesy of John Davidson, it was met with quite a negative response because the RFL didn't really seem to say much other than to remind Toronto of their responsibilities. But as sad as it sounds, there's little else that the RFL can do. There isn't a precedent set for the RFL picking up the tab for player contracts and things around visas and the ability to leave the country and the ability to work don't sit with the governing body. They sit with the UK Immigration Office, and the RFL's role there really is just to provide support and to push players down that route. It's positive to see that there are some players that have sorted themselves out, Gareth O'Brien being one of them, and we've seen a few others in recent weeks and even this week who've managed to find places to rebuild their careers. And my hope is that more players can find that and that we don't see a repeat of what we saw on Twitter earlier this week. But, I have no criticism of the players for taking that step. I think they needed to make their voices heard, and they needed to let people know what they're going through.
Yeah, you're right. It's an unfortunate sign of how desperate the players are getting, isn't it? And how desperate the overall situation is. You can't help but think that the RFL are in a bit of a tough spot as well, because naturally, being the governing body, everybody expects them to have the magic solution, etc. Where really, legally, etc. with the contracts, the buck does stop with Toronto, and it is the club at the moment that's letting the players down. And I echo your sentiments in hoping that the majority of these players can either get paid very soon or can find other opportunities for themselves. Speaking of other opportunities for Toronto players, Gareth O'Brien wasn't the only one to leave the club this week. We had Bodene Thompson confirmed yesterday as a Leeds player for the rest of this season going forward. Callum, I'll get your thoughts on this. Were you surprised by this? Sort of my initial thoughts, having spoken or been in a press conference with Richard Agar, is very reluctant to say whether they would sign any Toronto players, and perhaps suggested that they wouldn't be looking at Toronto for any recruitment this year, and yet Bodene Thompson has moved to Headingley with immediate effect. What are your thoughts on that signing for the Rhinos?
I think it's a kind of a win-win for both parties, really, because you've got the fact that it allows Richard Agar to strengthen his pack. I know he wasn't happy at all with the way his side performed against St Helens, and Bodene Thompson can certainly bring that extra steel to the pack. Of course, it gives Bodene a chance to show what he's capable of before the end of the season as well. I mean, he himself could have, just sat out, waited, and waited for other opportunities, but he's grabbed the opportunity with both hands. He's 32, so I mean, he's playing for perhaps one of the last contracts he'll have in his career. So with 180 appearances under his belt for the likes of NRL sides and Lee, Warrington and Toronto over here, then I think he'll bring plenty of experience to the pack, and he'll certainly be a good addition in my opinion.
Yeah, it's definitely a good thing for both parties, like you said. Bodene getting a lifeline there, getting out of the sticky situation that's enclosing in the players around Toronto, but so Leeds losing James Donaldson to sort of fairly long-term injury, and Alex Mellor as well to long-term injury, both in the pack. It certainly does bolster them with plenty of experience, so we'll see how he goes. Staying on the topic of Super League, we'll just wrap this up with the fixtures, rearranged fixtures. We'll get into the predictions. There's only 4 games this week now, unfortunately, for the reasons we've spoken about previously. Gents, I'll come to you both individually. Just brief thoughts on the fixture, who you think will win and by how many. First up on Saturday, we've got Wakefield Trinity versus Catalan Dragons. Tom, your thoughts on this match?
Catalan's Dragons looked very good last week. We're starting to see clubs slot into place now. We've seen everybody in action, and whilst Catalans were disappointing against St Helens, that was probably more of a reflection of how good Saints were. So I think overall Catalans to win that one by 10 points.
And Callum, which way do you see this one going?
I have to agree with Tom with the fact that Catalans will win. I think that Wakefield performed admirably against Wigan last weekend to only lose by a point, but having seen Catalans in action against Castleford, then I certainly think that Catalans will win by 12 or more.
Yeah, I'm undecided about this one. I've seen Catalans play well and Catalans play pretty poorly, whereas Wakefield were, as you said, gallant in defeat against Wigan. I think it'll be very, very close. I tend to agree. I think Catalans might just edge it by 2 points. Moving on to the second game on Saturday, Huddersfield Giants versus Warrington Wolves. Huddersfield didn't play last week. Warrington coming off a big win. What are your thoughts on this one, Tom?
I think Huddersfield being out of action last week, it'd be interesting to see what sort of impact that has. I think there are two schools of thought. Obviously, you think about the break from action and the chance to rest up after a bruising first week back, but you also think about the lack of alertness having sat a week out. I think on balance, Warrington looked very impressive. I don't know if impressive is the right word. They didn't really look to get out of third or fourth gear, but they still had enough in them to put a lot of points on Hull KR. And I think that freshness in the first 20 minutes might give them the edge against Huddersfield. So I'm going to go with a narrow Warrington win.
And Callum, which way do you see this one going?
I've been impressed with Huddersfield this season. I know they lost against Leeds the week before, but they had a 22-point advantage, and I think that Huddersfield could surprise a few this season. So I think Huddersfield are going to beat Warrington by 4 or 6 points.
Yeah, I think I saw enough from Huddersfield against Leeds to think that they're going to be a serious threat. I do agree with you. And Warrington, although they put a lot of points on Hull KR, haven't been convincing in the majority of the games they've played. And for that reason, I think Huddersfield might be able to nick this. So I'm going to go Huddersfield by 4 points. Moving on to Sunday, St Helens, who absolutely walloped Leeds last week against Castleford Tigers. Tom, your thoughts on this one?
I agree with Richard Agar. I think at the moment St Helens are on a different level to the rest of Super League, and I think Castleford on the back of a defeat. I think they'll show improvement this weekend, but I don't think